On today's show, we're going deep on marketing and AI with one of the biggest marketing experts in the world, Andrew Chen. He's a partner over at A16z. He famously led growth at Uber for a long time, and he has a must-read newsletter if you're in the marketing and growth space. We're gonna dive into everything marketing, AI, and the future with him. Let's get to today's show.
Welcome to the show, Andrew. Andrew, who is investing at the intersection of gaming and tech over at A16z. We are really excited to have you on to talk about AI and the change that it is going to cause for marketers, for growth people. So thanks for coming on the show.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. Always a huge fan of the podcast and excited to talk about all the topics.
Hey, Andrew, one thing we could start with is when did you start writing your original newsletter? The reason I'm asking is because your newsletter, when I was really just starting out in marketing, was the one that I would never miss. So I would never miss the edition of it. I always make sure I read it. But when did you actually start that originally?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, the funny thing was I started to write an anonymous blog when I first moved to the Bay Area in 2007. So I was 25 years old, moved to the Bay Area. I was like, okay, this will be a great way for me to stay in touch with a bunch of my friends in Seattle. That's originally where I'm from. So I forcibly subscribed my bunch of my close friends, my sister, my mom. That was my original blog, audience, and I would just write about whatever I was, learning. And what I found though was that I was learning so much about kind of this new discipline of user growth and marketing, kind of in a world of Web 2.0 and mobile and all that stuff, that it started to pick up from there. But if you go back and look at my early posts, they were literally about everything and anything eclectic it was almost like a journal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I think, 2 years in that I was like, oh, maybe this is actually pretty useful. And, I started to meet people like Mark Andreessen and, Josh Koppelman at First Round and, a bunch of the PayPal mafia via the blog. And I was like, wow, this is actually like a pretty amazing thing. And so, yeah, I felt lucky to be early enough to build in sort of quote unquote build in public, back in 2007.
Because I always think of your writing back then was similar to like Paul Graham. People kind of refer to those essays as timeless classics, and you managed to reach the pinnacle where you have these kind of timeless Andrew classics that always get brought up time and time again. And you had one of the reasons I'm kind of bringing that up is because you had a really cool model that everyone always refers back to about the saturation of marketing channels. Like it's a guarantee that these things will saturate at some time. There's a ceiling to all of these kind of different growth channels. And you had a really great article recently around AI and the evolution of marketing because of AI. And one of the things that most marketers and businesses in general are really scared about is how quickly AI can saturate things because it can copy and paste people's tactics. Now we can get into whether it really does copy and paste great tactics versus average tactics, but just how has your thinking evolved today with AI kind of really starting to be integrated into go-to-markets about how quickly these kind of channels and tactics and things get saturated?
The essay that you're referencing on my blog from years ago is called the Law of Shitty Click-Throughs.
Right, that's it.
It's a great title, by the way.
And
turns out great titles are part of timeless classics, and you
exactly,
nailed that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you got to do a little. Hopefully, there's some substance, but you definitely need a catchy title. So the thing with the Law of Shitty Click-Throughs is I basically looked at it and said, look, if you examine the first websites on the internet, and I was looking at Hotwired, which was sort of the predecessor to Wired.com. And the first banner ads that were ever created for websites like that. The crazy thing is the click-through rates were actually just enormous. These banner ads had 70% plus click-through rates. And people were so interested in them just because of the novelty factor. And you fast forward 20 years later, the average click-through rate on, across the Facebook network is probably, under 0.1%. And so you're just talking about an insane drop. And so we could run that same analysis, not just for banner ads, but for email marketing and for, SMS marketing and for, all sorts of things. And the argument there is look, marketers are sort of in a perpetual kind of forever war with each other. And as a marketer, you kind of have like this choice that you can make in the early years. Like, am I going to go to a cutting edge new marketing channel? Okay. And that's great. And, today it might be, kind of variations of what's going on in the creator economy. It might be variations of what's going on in, all the interesting things in Web3 and incentivized marketing that people are doing. It could be, many other things that we could talk about. but your addressable TAM is just smaller on those channels definitionally because they're new. On the flip side, you could go for really, really big and broad channels, but then you're stuck in there with all the other marketers that are sitting there copying each other endlessly. And you have to decide like, okay, well, the performance characteristics on those channels are, law of shitty click-throughs. They're getting worse and worse and worse. And, where do I want to play? And so, so you often have that happening. And then, Kieran, to your point on this with AI, every emerging technology is intertwined with the marketing techniques that sort of sit on there. You obviously can't have email marketing if you haven't invented email. and by the way, it was funny enough, I was doing a deep dive on like kind of archaic Victorian age technologies from 100 plus years ago, and like literally as soon as they invented the telegraph, there was telegraph spam. Right, which is just great.
We're not doing anything new here.
Exactly what you'd expect. And as soon as you invent newspapers, which you had to invent these like steam printing press newspapers in the early to mid 1800s. One of the big innovations that put what eventually became the New York Times, catapulted it into success was they used an ad-driven business model, and you could buy these newspapers for 1 penny, and then off you would go, instead of at the time the original model was something that cost 10 times as much. And so this was sort of like a freemium-ish, kind of thing. And so I just think that I can't help as somebody that has this lens around growth and marketing to look at everything that's happening in AI and not immediately consider all the consequences that are going to occur. And I think, Kieran, I think you're absolutely right. I think what it means is that there's quite a few things, like SEO. I think that's probably the most obvious one, that are going to be completely reinvented, upended, maybe made irrelevant, possibly. If Google decides to one box every single one of the answers that you have, I mean, what does that mean for the 20 search results under it?
Yeah.
It may be completely different. And then on the flip side, it may be very exciting for other things like video, where it takes, we were just talking, just before we started about how much of a pain in the ass it is to start a video production. Maybe now it's just as easy as writing a little blurb, and then, full on amazing interactive, video gets generated. And so maybe we'll have an explosion in video, or maybe we'll get an explosion in interactive video. I mean, all that stuff is very, very exciting and cutting edge.
Yeah, I think what strikes me differently about this, right, in the past waves of technological evolution, let's say from Web 1 to Web 2, where you had the rise of mobile, you had the rise of the social web, it's not that the Web 1.0 channels, the banner ads, the print ads, out of home, all those things, it's not that they stopped working. There were just these new, more effective channels. Where with AI, it's facilitating saturation across channels new and old. Like you used SEO as the example. I can tell you from personal experience that the most established companies who are great at SEO are getting disrupted the most, right? It's normally like if you have this big moat and you have this expertise, you can kind of grind out and hold off that saturation longer than everybody else. And with AI, the opposite is happening, where the people who are most reliant on a channel are actually getting disrupted first, which is a very different dynamic than what has, I think, happened over the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, Kipp, I think that's right. I think generally these channels have life cycles to them. And what that means is, is direct mail, does it still work or not? I mean, I assume it's working for somebody based on, how much direct mail I'm still getting. At the same time, I think for all the marketers that are looking for that edge, we're going to newer and better things, right? And then simultaneously, I would say, if you are a very large branded incumbent and you are able to take a very long payback cycle, you're maybe willing to, stick with channels that may or may not, make sense for other people, simply because for you, it's almost like brand spend, so it's just like you've had it for years and you might as well keep going. And so I think within, the way that AI might disrupt things, I think it has a lot to do with, where the consumer engagement and attention is going to go. If it turns out that, the hypothesis that people will start mostly interacting with LLMs and the search engine result page will matter less and less, that's a big shift. Now, the world is made up of a lot of, late adopters, right? And, and it may take 10 years or 20 years for people to stop typing keywords in a certain way and instead, talk to their phone and just ask them questions, or it might happen quickly. Who knows? And I think, if you're established, you probably keep it all in your portfolio and you probably experiment with some of the new channels that are coming out. But I think if you are a startup and you are building something from scratch, you have to go where all the new innovation is. It's really hard for you to compete in these established channels as a result.
Yeah, one way that I've always thought about marketing is as the channel becomes more mature, the complexity to do great marketing that stands out increases, right? You can actually, graph those two things out to your, which is basically the law of shitty click-throughs, right? Like I remember sharing a stage with Gary Vee where he was talking about his early days in marketing, and his initial open rates in his first newsletter were something like 90%, right? Because the effort to get a 90% open rate back then, where it wasn't a commoditized channel, it was quite an easy thing to do. And as those things mature, people get much better. It gets much harder to do marketing that stands out. And then to Kipp's point, like what's fascinating about AI is with these other changes in like these other technological shifts, has opened up new ways to market to your audience, like has opened up new channels to market to your audience, where AI actually doesn't do that yet. Like maybe it will. It actually makes the channels you have access to today, it actually accelerates the diminishing returns from them. And to your point on startups, I think that's a good point to maybe just riff on a little bit, because I get asked this a lot from the companies that I invest in is, should I start to invest in should I start to do marketing in the channels that have always worked? Or should I start to pivot towards these new channels that should work within the AI world? And the channels that all startups have, for the most part, built a scalable and forecastable model around have been paid, search, virality. And all three of those are getting harder and have diminishing returns. And I don't know what if that's the today slide with those three things, I actually don't know what the tomorrow is that is actually forecastable, measurable, and scalable in the same ways. Like I haven't seen glimpses of that, because where I've seen AI add a ton of leverage is when you've acquired the demand. Now you actually have a ton of interesting ways to extract value from that demand and close it into customers. But it's not clear to me what are the replacements for those three things.
Hey everyone, we're always getting requests on the show for more recommendations on how you grow with AI. Well, we're bringing you another one. We've got this free guide from HubSpot on how you can use AI to completely change the way you create content. This guide, it's got it all. Prompts to assist you writing and editing, steps to incorporate AI into your marketing plan, and guidance on how to roll out AI across your team. It is the guidebook on how to integrate AI into your content creation. I've dropped the link in the description below. You're going to want to check it out. Now back to today's show.
Yeah. I think what is benefiting a lot of AI startups right now is just the tremendous amount of consumer engagement. We have seen more AI startups go from 0 to 1 million of ARR in a month, of launch, than we've seen anything, growing that fast, right? And I think the reason for that is because when all of these new technologies emerge, kind of in the early years, all that matters is does it have the it works feature or not? It doesn't matter how pretty it is. It doesn't matter, what the brand is or the design. I mean, we're all, using a product called ChatGPT. I mean, think about how, from a branding standpoint, like how crazy that is, right? It's like a bunch of just letters just strung together. Like no marketing person would have come up with that. But the fact that it works is enough that people want to try something new. Now, of course, we're gonna evolve into a different phase of the market. We're gonna get to a phase where it is about functionality and what is it that this LLM can do over this other LLM, and is it integrated into my workflows the right way, and all that good stuff. And then eventually, and this might be 10 plus years from now, these products often get into a world where it's more about brand and design and UX. That's sort of like where we are in kind of non-AI mobile apps. And so I think, because product categories themselves kind of follow this life cycle, the funny thing I would say from a growth perspective is that a lot of these products don't have to do anything clever with marketing. They just have to do something amazing that previously was, couldn't have been done. And there's so much buzz around around it in social media, et cetera, that it just works. Now, of course, I think we all are cognizant of the fact that because so much of social media is visual in nature these days, right? It's video, it's photos, et cetera, that if your product is in particular a creative tool, that allows some kind of very interesting transformation, whether it's in video or it's, upscaling photos or it's doing something interesting with audio, that certainly spreads further and faster, right? That's a little bit of this kind of product channel fit kind of idea. And so I do think that, that certainly exists. And then Kieran, I think the other thing that is really cool about kind of, where we sit now with having so many different, marketing channels is that if you're a new product, you don't actually have to go for the biggest channel right off the bat. You can go build your 10,000 person Discord channel, and you're not competing with, a Coca-Cola Discord channel that's, 100 million users. That doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. That's its own thing. And by the way, I've still seen a lot of products launch on college campuses, in this really classic thing that Facebook and Tinder and many other folks have done. And, why does that work? It's college campuses are just, it's very Lindy. It's something that's always been around, and no huge company is going to go after it because it's also a little bit too small, but it's a great way to pick up your first couple thousand users.
Yeah, I definitely think for the AI startups, the product demos are really their best source of virality at the moment. I had a company that was talking to two great founders called Hyperbanded AI, and they have a AI tool that allows you to create a representation of your customer to allow new reps to sell into that person, to train the reps to sell into that customer. And you can basically they created a bunch of bots for people, and those people could actually, film this. I did this, film myself trying to be a salesperson. And then I share that with everyone because I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Look at me trying to be a salesperson. And again, it's because it's such a new use case. And so the virality is built into the fact that the use case is so new. I think one of the things that you did in your article, which you kind of riffed on, what are the opportunities for marketers? I think a lot of the AI narrative is around what are we going to lose? But I think it would be kind of cool to kind of talk about what were some of the opportunities you spoke to in that article.
I think that there's, I sort of made a couple core arguments, right? I think the first thing is that there's a bunch of boring answers to what's going to happen AI plus marketing. I think we all know that everything's going to get cheaper and people are going to create more video, and there's going to be infinite variations of landing pages and ad creatives and all that. I think that's obvious, and we're gonna all reap the benefits of that. I think the other view is just thinking through, well, what is it that infinite kind of access to marketing labor would give us? If we all imagine that we had kind of the world's best marketing agencies and growth teams and product teams kind of in our pocket, and we could do anything, how would that change the way that we think about this? And I think kind of underneath that, if you kind of pursue that thought experiment, I think one of the first things you'd say is well, first, in a world where you have you're able to create infinite amounts of content, why would you ever create content that's targeted at 1 million people when you could make content that's targeted one-on-one to people, right? And in that way, does that start to almost erase the boundary between marketing and sales? Because if it turns out that every piece of creative is custom tailored to Kipp and knows everything that Kipp's ever bought and is interested in and everything that's ever happened, and by the way, and it may not be an ad, it may actually be interactive. Maybe you want to be able to click into something or interact with something and then have a whole conversation. At some point, haven't you just built kind of a virtual sales agent? And kind of where does that go? And so I'm very excited about kind of the idea of the companion or the interactive agent as almost the form factor for the way that we talked about desktop software is that's in the form of kind of executables and applications that you install. For the internet, we had the web, right? For mobile, we had apps. And I think for the AI era, companions sort of, and agents sort of seem like that's kind of the UI, mode that we're all going to end up interacting with. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation there. A related thing to that is thinking about, internationalization. I mean, one of the amazing new things that I've been doing with my elderly, Chinese, Taiwanese parents has been, I can actually, my Mandarin's okay. We all moved when I was 5, and so I just don't have the vocabulary to describe to them like what I do for work or what I'm thinking. And so it's amazing to be able to, ask ChatGPT, hey, can you reply in Mandarin? Can you tell them what venture capital is? Can you tell them, what a limited partner is? Can you tell them what, the law of shitty click-throughs is, and just have them explain? I mean, it's just amazing. And so the idea though that, that can really be built into anything. And we're going to get to a world where we're one global audience, as opposed to kind of this very, balkanized kind of, certain countries speak certain things, certain cultures have different things. You can kind of instantly, internationalize. And then maybe the third one I'll kind of leave us all with is we've sort of been marching from a content and media perspective towards more and more vividness. Okay, so what do I mean by that? The internet, if you go back, 25 years ago, was all text. There's really no, in fact, actually before Mark Andreessen, built the original Mosaic browser, the internet, literally, the web did not have an image tag, right? It was literally all text and just colors. And so then we added images. That was important. Then we added eventually video, right? In 2005, kind of around, YouTube and everything that was happening. Obviously, Web 2.0 was a lot about interactivity. And then now what we see is like all people want to consume is video. We were just talking about the idea that you can't build a podcast as an audio only format anymore. You have to go video. And so, the broader question is like, well, what's after video? I think that's a really interesting one. It's one of the reasons why at Andreessen Horowitz, I've been, these days focused very much on the gaming, side of things. And the reason is because there's nothing more vivid than a 3D environment where you're with a combination of people as well as agents. You're exploring, a new environment. You're talking, you're solving problems together. That to me is kind of like where this all goes. As kind of media becomes more and more vivid. And like today, if you were to try to build an amazing 3D open world environment, it's going to cost you like $100 million to build something like that. But imagine again, in a world of infinite labor with all this AI running around, are we going to be able to, as marketers, spin up almost brand new, really interesting, interactive, high fidelity experiences, almost the way that we spin up like meme images or like individual creative ads? Is it the case that when something, big happens, in the world, that we immediately are able to build a whole experience, kind of around it? And so, these are the kinds of things that I think can get really, really interesting, because it sort of allows us as marketers and folks working on these growth teams to sort of keep pursuing this like consumer engagement and vividness trend that's kind of ongoing.
Yeah, I think that's something Kieran and I have been obsessed with. It's like the cost of web app development eventually approaching zero, and you can have highly personalized, highly disposable, very niche web experiences. And I think you painted a really good picture for everybody watching today. It's like, if we started with an internet with just text, then we added images, then we added video. It's obvious to me that the next stage is going to be very personalized video and images, right? Through the use of an interactive. And then we're basically saying, even beyond that, there's going to be deep interactive web experiences that could potentially be one-to-one, because you can have AI agents building out a content, media, gaming, whatever it may be, experience just for Andrew, just for Kipp, just for Kieran. And that in the world where that is marketing, life gets very interesting, right? Because then you have personalized channels that you're then doing personalized call to actions, monetization events, all of those things, which is very, very different than the world we live in today, which is like, let's guess what this segment of thousands or millions of people want. And we'll keep guessing until our guess is good enough that we're like at the high end of the shitty click-through range.
Yes, right? That's right. And I think we're, I think with all of the AI kind of conversation via LLMs that are happening right now, we're sort of in a golden age where I feel so grateful every time I open up, Cloud or ChatGPT or one of these apps, and I can type things in and I just get the non-advertising, I feel like I'm using, Google in the earliest version where before any ads. But it seems obvious to me that the entire AI business will eventually, become ad supported. And so what that'll mean is, we're going to have to figure all this stuff out, but it seems pretty obvious that in the same way that there's SEO, that there's going to have to be this entire thing of, okay, well, when an LLM answers your question about the best places to travel in Iceland, how does it decide kind of, given that an inherently commercial question that the customer's asking, how to actually prioritize, what to show, and is there a business model behind that? And I think it's inevitable that consumers are going to want free as opposed to paying a monthly subscription in order for that to work. And so, and this is doubly true for international customers. And so I think it's I think that presents a huge opportunity for marketers over the next decade to see whether that conversation is to LLMs or it's to agents or it's to companions, how advertising and marketing will sort of, be part of that mediation that'll exist.
Yeah, I think soon. I think we can kind of pre-announce it here, Kieran. We're gonna launch a free app at HubSpot to help companies understand how they rank in LLMs and how to improve how they show up in LLMs, because we have that same hypothesis, right? That as more searches go there, especially with the iPhone 16 in the fall, which I think is going to precipitate another round of AI adoption with the OpenAI integration there, SEO is still going to be important, but there's going to be a new level of how your company shows up across AI agents and LLMs that you're going to have to basically monitor and keep track of. I think that's right. That thesis is totally right.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that all these kind of marketing workflows are just going to be very, very different and maybe more indirect, right? I was recently had dinner with a couple sci-fi writers. And I was asking them about using LLMs as part of the writing process. They did not love the idea. Let me put it that way.
Of course.
But one of the things they talked about, which I think is fantastic, kind of a great encapsulation, is they view their job as they are supposed to write about ideas that don't exist in the data set. Right.
Yes, yeah.
That novelty, which is something that human beings just we love, kind of novel stories, novel approaches, novel brands, novel messaging. That if you are, as a marketer, able to do things that sit outside the data set, that there will be a huge advantage to being first, versus a world where everybody's going to be able to create infinite creative and infinite new ways of messaging. I think that whole area gets commoditized pretty quickly. And Kipp, to your point on using all of these tools to monitor kind of where things are in AI, I think not only is that going to happen, but ultimately that will be part of almost an instantaneous monitoring workflow, right? Mm-hmm. Because this is an interesting question too. In a world where you have pushed out an infinite number of variations of an email marketing campaign that you've done, how do you decide, that, this one's working and this one's not working? It's easy in a world where you can A/B test and you're like, I'm just going to have 4 groups and I'm going to send it out to a couple 100,000 users and I'm going to just, do the analysis. But if you're literally sending very, very personalized things, then even the process of monitoring the performance, iterating on the output, doing the next set of sequences, even that probably has to be managed, via AI. There's no kind of way around it. And so I think it's going to become very interesting, because the world of being a marketer is going to become much more indirect and much more, something where you're managing a bunch of workflows as opposed to, sitting around doing the creative yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And then for the rare folks that are able to do something completely novel, I think they will end up doing very well.
I think it comes indirect in a couple of ways. I think it becomes indirect in terms of marketing is going to have to go back and sit at a place where even the work you do is measured in indirect ways, right? We've been very fortunate over the past decade that it's been really easy to measure the return on investment on marketing, because again, because channels like search, paid, they're just like much easier to look at the return on investment. As you start to push into these other channels, even if LLMs become the way that people search and actually get information back, you're gonna have to use correlation models, conversion studies, all these kind of different things to actually figure out the impact of marketing. But just coming back to like how marketers use AI, like part of this, you've hit on all the points that we agree with, by the way. The personalization of content, personalization of code, go much more faster in international. The other one I want to maybe come back on is the AI concierge, which is like the companion that you have with you. The one I want to just touch on, which I think is really interesting, because you kind of made this point, which is, I think AI will enable marketers in two ways, and maybe all people in two ways, but it will enable you to copy and paste good much more rapidly. But that's good within the current data set, right? So you can figure out what good is. And one of the examples that we have done on a previous show is, and I was showing people, like I was using Claude to figure out writing styles, right? I could figure out, like, it would do a pretty good job because you have enough data in the data set. If I give it a template and then replicate your writing style, it would actually replicate your writing to an okay degree, right? And your writing is great, but I could replicate your writing to a good level, right? So now I can actually replicate like good. But to your point, because that becomes so much, that's going to get really saturated quite fast, right? Like the amount of marketers who now get to good is going to be accelerated. What I'm always interested in is like, well, what about the great marketers? And the great marketers, I think, are great, or the great growth people are great, or most people who are great because they are curious and can figure out new things. I think for that group of people, I think AI unlocks the ability to be much more creative because it takes away some of the barriers to do that. And so the example that I've been like thinking about over the weekend and playing around with is, actually, there's a great example from Darren, our producer, stuck in my head, which is like Darren was talking about the fact that he is not a coder, right? But he had a bunch of people over for a football match. He wrote an app in Claude. Like Claude wrote him the app. He published it to Claude, and then he had the people in the room use the app during the match to look at data and stats around the players. Right, that is wild to me. Like I don't think people understand how wild that is, right? And over the weekend, I had a newsletter. I was telling Kipp, like I sent a newsletter basically teaching people how to do this writing style thing. And everyone was like, can you release that as a product? And I was like, huh. And so it took me an hour to write the app in Claude, and I could have it published and have it back to my newsletter readers to actually use that app. And to me, that is where I get excited about AI. I think the replication of good is going to be cool, but the ability to go fast on, and I don't think it's AI helps you. I guess what I'm saying, my point there is the idea is still the value for the person, but the execution of the idea should be much more rapid because AI enables you to do it much more quicker. So yes. AI can't give you new ideas, but it can enable you to execute on your ideas much, much faster. And I'm just wondering, like, do you kind of agree with that summary, or how do you think about that?
All the anxiety and concern that's happened is people are thinking defensively about, hey, I have a particular function, I have a certain thing that, that I'm good at, and I would hate for an AI to be able to replicate my writing and, et cetera, et cetera. I think the funny thing though is I think that the opportunity really exists in, the kind of thing that, Kieran, you and Darren are experimenting with, which is how do you take a person that maybe they are master of a particular function that maybe does get easier to do over time, but then you give the ability for that person to color outside the lines into other functions. Mm-hmm. If you're not technical, being able to, build a web app is like amazing. And then by the way, like, all the people that are building, video and can maybe now build a whole like video game experience, and they haven't been able to do that. I often think a little bit about how amazing it is that someone like J.K. Rowling can, she can have $1,000 Chromebook, go down to a cafe and write a book in, 18 months or whatever, and then millions of people will read it, and how powerful that is for a single person to be able to do. Now, what she can't do, and what none of us can do, is to make a Marvel movie by ourselves, right? But that's going to happen. For sure. Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to cost $1 billion and 11 years to make. What if a single person could build something like that, the way that an author or writer can go down to a cafe and just open their laptop and do the thing. So I do think that it's exciting, especially when you're thinking about kind of coloring outside the lines. And there's also kind of an interesting question of, within a function, if we take, video as an example, do you end up with like the Gary V's of the world who are already popular able, or Mr. Beasts or whatever, they actually become even more productive. And so then they get
Right.
bigger, right? That's one really interesting dynamic that'll happen. The other interesting dynamic will be the content creators that are at the, that can't create any video all of a sudden can. There's more people who aren't doing something than are even doing it. And so maybe you get something that's very interesting starting at the bottom too. And so, it seems like the folks that really kind of are pressured in all of this are kind of the folks that are maybe in the middle and it's a little bit mediocre and, and like what happens, there. Well, for them, they're probably going to have to then cross into other forms of content, other forms of media in order for this to work. And, we're talking about content creation a little bit right now, but just to overlay the marketing and, growth angle, what I would say is I think all of this applies to, to marketing channels, marketing formats, et cetera, right now. We're in a world where even as everything moves to video, the percentage of companies that would love to do a ton of amazing video related to their products, whether that's great demos or customer testimonials or kind of little movie trailers, they have to go hire people right now to be able to do that in order to, to go viral on X and Discord and all these places. But I think we're going to, very quickly approach a world where that will just be part of that standard repertoire and it will benefit the very best people in the ecosystem who can then be 1,000 times more productive. And I think it will also benefit folks that, have never touched Final Cut Pro in their life, right? And all of a sudden they're going to be able to do a lot of new things. And so we have a bunch of companies working on this. One of the companies that it has been really cool to get deep with has been a company in New York called Captions, and it's an ex-Snapchat team that's been working on all of this. And and they're going hard on this idea that from a paradigm standpoint, you don't need to have a timeline. You don't need to have kind of all these channels and things that you're editing kind of in a traditional movie format, that people are actually willing to create video using a more like TikTok-like, kind of format. And that's going to be the future. We also see this with one of our portfolio companies, Descript, and Andrew Mason and team there are doing fantastically well. And that's another great example where it's like, yeah, you can do audio, you can do video, but maybe the right format is actually editing the text that's in a document, and the text is tied to the, kind of video frames as opposed to all that. So, I think a lot of this stuff has the potential to be reinvented. And with that reinvention, I think the marketers kind of, follow along really tightly with all this product innovation, because every time there's a new innovation, a new, technology platform, it's inevitable that it will be used for advertising and marketing and growth. And so, that's one of the really exciting things.
What seems to be clear is that if you're a marketer, if you're a creator, you're not going to be able to exist in one format, one medium, right? Like, if you're a great writer, the tools are going to exist that writing is going to also eventually be turned into video and audio and other formats. And like, we're going to a more multimedia, more immersive world, which is kind of your point, Andrew. And I think some of these early apps are helping to demonstrate that, where you're like, oh, cool, I have this 30-minute episode, and that 30-minute episode can now be short form video. It could be text, it could be an email newsletter, it can be an audio podcast, it could be so many things, instead of like, hey, I just write 1,500 words a week and that's what I do, or whatever that may be. And that the world is a world of more, it seems like, in the future, more so than like less.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's right. I think there's going to be more avenues of competition, more complexity, and which is very, very exciting. I think for all of us. And I think, even the way the growth in marketing discipline has evolved over the last couple of decades, I think, shows that there is, that the discipline is just getting more complex. Used to be that you had product management, you had, sort of brand marketing and comms and PR. And then you also had, sort of direct, marketing, kind of all as pretty separate disciplines. These days, whenever I go into one of these companies and I talk to somebody that's in any of these disciplines, they're sort of, fully expected to be conversant on all the things, like they have to have, aesthetic taste and, have a point of view on, brand guidelines, but they should also be able to talk KPIs. They should also be able to, think about product strategy. And I think, to your point on this, I think, what that means is that in many ways, I think the discipline gets bigger. It's a bigger umbrella. And I think that's especially true where if it turns out that cloud and kind of this sort of artifacts idea, being able to use LLMs to build applications and products gets more and more powerful. I think then it might be that building the product becomes trivial, and it's the distribution that's the hard part. And if it's the distribution that's the hard part, then it's like even more complex in terms of how you actually get your product out there in this really competitive environment. And we've sort of already been running. It used to be that in the 1990s you would actually go raise a Series A to go build your product. And these days it's like if by your seed round you're expected to have your app fully built and have your first test set of users. Now play that forward another 10 years. If everyone can build a product that's like an Instagram or like a Twitter, just in the LLM, and that can be your like quick evening project. We're just going to go from having, I think there's like 4 million apps in the App Store. Are we going to have 40 million? Are we going to have hundreds of million? I mean, is the concept of a pre-built app even going to make sense, or is everything going to be kind of generated almost bespoke? I mean, it's wild to think about where this all goes. But I think it sort of reinforces the importance of marketing in all this, because the more trivial it is to build these products, the more it becomes a challenge of, okay, well, how do you rise above all the noise and actually get to the customer in the way that you want?
That's the wild thing that I think about software and AI in general is like, typically it has not been economically prudent to try to build an app for like 1,000 people who want that customized experience. But if the cost of code goes to zero and anyone can create that app, you suddenly have the opportunity for people to have apps that service like 50 people and pay $99 a month and just have a whole set of those kind of apps, right? It's like the tiny version of tiny. And that to me is the wild part. Like I actually wonder how you think about that with your VC hat on, because those companies don't need to raise, right? And so like if everything goes into niche, and it's not going to be true of everything. There's always going to be mass software that everyone needs to use. Everyone needs an LLM. Everyone needs a Google search. But do you have a perspective on that as an investor, even like how that might shift the way that shift the kind of companies that you're going to start to see?
This can only be a good thing, I think, for the ecosystem, right? And the reason why I say that is because the idea of making a living, being a content creator, like having a Substack newsletter or having a YouTube, that was just not a thing 20 years ago. Like you just couldn't do that. And then once the market actually got big enough and you had all these people interested in all these kind of niche things, I'm on the board of Substack, and the Substack guys will tell you, there's tons of people making over $1 million a year writing about the weirdest, most niche topics out there. And how great is that, right? And what that does is it just creates many new small businesses and sometimes big businesses when you look at this, and sometimes what that means is one of those companies that sits on these platforms, one of these media companies, and there's been quite a few as you guys know, kind of within the YouTube world, for example. You can build a media company, and that might in itself be an investable, kind of company. Or we're involved in a business called Voldex, which is a game developer that sits on top of the Roblox ecosystem, as an example. And so those themselves might be investable. Or what happens is you just have to figure out how to invest in the platform, right? And what is the thing that's going to help you build all of these? So Kieran, I think an amazing business idea, I'm sure somebody will go figure out, is if there are many little niche vertical SaaS companies that can target, all the little workflows for dentist offices and, plumbing, vendors and, all those other things. Is there enough commonality within all of those products to build a platform that sits on top of everything and make it really easy for anybody to spin up, that kind of a business? And if that's the case, like that's probably a pretty interesting, company, even if the individual companies that come off of it are like micro scale, right? And then on the flip side, sometimes these companies are, the little micro companies that sit on top of these platforms, sometimes they end up growing a little bit bigger than what we all think. And I think for our role in venture capital, we really view it as, how do we take things that show a lot of promise and might work, and just scale it to something as big as we can possibly imagine. And sometimes the stuff is really counterintuitive. I wrote a tweet recently just talking about the idea that if you look at the last 10 years and you were like, okay, some of the top companies were, one, an app where you get into a stranger's car, another app that lets you watch other people play video games. Not you play video games, you watch other people play video games. And the third, being something that helps you find people's random houses where you can sleep in their house. I mean, that's just wild.
Yeah.
That those ideas were like the billion-dollar ideas. And so a lot of times, I think the reason why I say that this can only be good for the ecosystem is because if it creates the opportunity for people to become app developers that never in their life would they have considered that as a possibility. Maybe they were only comfortable being, bloggers, or they were only comfortable being kind of video people, or they're only comfortable doing whatever, building a Shopify, and then all of a sudden they can become like a SaaS company. That's awesome. Like that's great. So I hope that happens. And then I think we'll all be surprised by some of the companies that come out of there. I think we're going to read a lot of really fun stories about, two kids that start and build, dentist, software. And then all of a sudden it becomes, the next Square, or the next, one of these kind of mega platform companies.
Yeah. There's a lot of untapped ideas. Hopefully AI can unlock. Maybe we'll just leave with this. Andrew, if you were a marketeer growth person trying to figure out how to be incredible at your job within the AI era, what are like the couple of skills you think that person should be learning now, you think are going to separate the great from the pretty average?
Yeah, I think right now there's no question that the rate of change in the environment is just going to rapidly spike. And so I think, one of the first things I would really consider, it depends on where people are in their careers, et cetera, but how do you put yourself in a place where you can see as much of the change and kind of, really figure out what's cutting edge as much as possible. And so, I always tell folks that they should spend 3 to 5 years in San Francisco and kind of be right in the middle of it. And especially if you're earlier in your career, there's a huge bonus and kind of advantage to that. And I think, that's kind of number one. Number two is, finding a role where you're able to experiment and experience a lot of, what's happening, in the marketing world. There are folks that, if you're working on something that's a little bit more traditional, how do you kind of pivot what you're working on, towards a lot of what's changing. And then I think the third thing is trying to, whenever there's kind of a lot of new emerging technology happening, I think you just have a huge advantage to actually going to the frontier, and really seeing for yourself what's working and not working, rather than reading, what's working for other people and what's, listening to podcasts and, doing all these things. The reality is that, things are moving so fast, nobody knows, right? Like everyone's speculating, everybody's kind of like trying new things, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you put yourself in a situation where you're able to go and see it for yourself? And so, that might mean for the entrepreneurial folks out there to be able to, start their own companies and really experience that, that loop. For other folks, it will be, being part of teams that are, very AI forward. And finding a role where you're able to kind of like learn by doing. And so, and that's the exciting part is, if you were to join a marketing team that was all about, Google and Facebook ads, the reality is like, there's not a lot of, places to grow, in that right now, because that's pretty well understood. But if you go somewhere that's all about using, the latest and greatest AI tools, or you're marketing an AI tool yourself, then you're starting to talk about like being able to, really grow your skill set quickly, and really learning, because right now nobody knows anything, and that's just fantastic.
Yeah. I think 100%. If you want to really accelerate your skills, putting yourself in the right spots, and then being a practitioner and actually learning for yourself is hugely important. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know our listeners are going to get a ton of value from this, and we appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for being here.
This data is wrong every freaking time.
Have you heard of HubSpot?
HubSpot is a CRM platform where everything is fully integrated.
Whoa, I can see the client's whole history, calls, support tickets, emails, and here's a task from 3 days ago I totally missed.
HubSpot. Grow better.